Welcome, Emer, for another wonderful edition of our conversation. How are you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing fabulous.
Excellent.
And doing fabulous is a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, but it's the opposite of fabulous.
Oh.
Project management catastrophe. We've all heard of them. I can think of one here in Victoria not that long ago with a transportation system.
Mm-hmm.
But when we all love when things go well.
Mm-hmm.
And we all learn from when things don't go well. But what have some of the catastrophes you've come across? What kind of insight have you learned from those? And what are some of the things we think we can share about what to do when it all goes wrong?
Well, I think, gosh, it's a great question. There's so much in it. I'll tell you, the first thing that popped into my mind, which might come as a bit of a shock to you, is where's the project charter? I cannot stress enough how important it is as a project team to have a North Star to look to in times of crisis. And for me, based on the body of knowledge of project management, but that represents over 50 years of professionals in the work, experiencing, learning lessons, they all point to we have to have a great project charter that is signed at project initiation, that has the sponsor's name on it, that has the project manager's name on it, perhaps even key interest holders that have agreed to, at a really high level, this is what we all said we were going to do. And in that project charter, there is scope. And that scope, it's not the scope statement in the charter, but it's a picture at a high level of what we say we're going to do. And as a result, it gives us, in times of turmoil and complexity, something to look to remind ourselves, okay, how bad is this? And so often, I am called into a conversation with a project team where things have gone south. And my first question to them is, let's take a look at the project charter. And I have to say, I'm embarrassed to tell you that a lot of the time, they say we didn't have one. And I understand in the world of projects and in the world of fast-paced organizational change that it feels like a step that we don't always have to take. I understand that. What I keep coming back to in my own experience is when we lack something as foundational as a contract, essentially, a charter that initiates and agrees to the work being done, when the complexity comes, we got nothing. There is no North Star. And, the temptation in those times of complexity is to look to the sponsor or to the key interest holders and say, well, you tell us what the North Star is. But I'm telling you, Martin, asking your key interest holders or your sponsor when times are tough what the North Star is, you will get their fears. You will get their North Star based on how they feel about the complexity. You won't necessarily get them being able to reflect to you how they felt on day one. And projects, when we initiate them and when we plan them, we need to remember what was our intention in the beginning. Because I will say another controversial thing. Not only is it, where's your project charter? But for a lot of projects, I think we need to ask ourselves, if the charter cannot be fulfilled based on the complexity or the changes, then it's okay to close that project down and to start a new charter. And I feel like that's a better, healthier, more professional way for us to deal with some of the complexities that come along in projects. Case in point, the one you're speaking of. Locally, we had a huge transportation infrastructure project. It was done at the federal as well as the provincial level when it comes to funding. We had local construction and, engineering firms involved. And then we also had bidding processes. And in the muddying of all of that, what we had with complexity was we had different people come to the table at different times. And their lessons learned weren't always well shared with those who had actually been tangibly doing the work. And when that level of complexity came, instead of us all, perhaps, and I wasn't on that project, but instead of us asking ourselves, what's the North Star? Um, Instead, I think what we had a lot of was finger pointing. Oh, well, you didn't do this, or that didn't happen, or this didn't happen. And in reality, the finger pointing doesn't accomplish success moving forward. It just gives us a defense for what we feel like we can't control. But good project teams know that actually moving forward is the best way. Sometimes moving forward means closing that project and starting a new one. Saying to our teams, hey, this is not about failure. This is about massive issues, risks realized that took us so far away from our North Star that we recognize actually now it's a new project. And the best way for us to build accountability is to close this one, take those lessons, initiate a new project charter, get all of our key stakeholders, interest holders on the same page, and then let's navigate and plan a new course. Doesn't mean we have to throw out all of our plans, but it does mean that we mutually agree to the new North Star. And I think that in the body of knowledge is something that we don't talk about enough. And I think a lot of times organizations, particularly government potential agencies, think about that perhaps being wasted resources. But I think the challenge is how do we calculate overall the wasted resource in trying to get the project back on track when it's changed too much and now we're doing something new?
Yeah, I absolutely love what you just said there around about it being new.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, if anything about the last several years
Mm-hmm.
going through a pandemic has taught us that what you think tomorrow has and what tomorrow actually has for you
Yeah.
may not be anywhere near the same thing.
Yeah.
But you had a piece in there, and I really love this. I'd love to explore a little further, which was around let's get all the interest holders on board.
Mm.
And I love your use of charter because getting everybody on board when everything is sunshine and rainbows and it's beautiful, everyone's agreeing. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
hey, it's beautiful. I love it. When everyone's looking down the barrel of a pandemic or looking
Yeah.
down the barrel of a recession,
Yeah.
you're all of a sudden fears come up.
Yeah.
And now you're dealing with not just the project, but the project and the genuine risk and the perceived risk.
Mm-hmm.
And what are maybe some things that you've learned around we're in fear
Yeah.
or we're in calamity?
Yeah.
How do we keep our North Star moving to keep the project going or starting over?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. First and foremost, fear is a very unstable place to stand when you make decisions. Because when you're motivated out of fear and feeling overwhelmed, you're human. And by you, I don't mean you alone. I mean you or the royal you of your project team. When everyone is feeling fear, they're in an emotional state. When humans are in emotional states, their prefrontal cortex, which is that sort of most recently developed part of the brain where logic and reason live, this is inaccessible oftentimes to humans, certainly in fear experiences. You know, when we experience fear as humans, it's fight, flight, or freeze. That's the oldest part of our brain. I love to call it the lizard brain. It's the, keep us alive feeling. That feeling, that emotion in fear comes before we're even conscious of it. It's actually like a millisecond before we have conscious thought. And that fear, flight, or freeze experience is so highly emotional that putting all your interest holders together in a conversation when everybody's freaking out emotionally, you're not going to be able to parse apart the bias, the fear, the truth, the logic. It's asking for something that really isn't very achievable. And even worse, I think I see sometimes project teams do this. They, as a team, have perhaps settled their own fears. They've come to a little bit more even keel state and they're able to think clearly, but they bring their interest holders in, and the interest holders are still in a very fearful emotional state. And the team tries to force the interest holder to have a logical conversation. When in fact, those individuals, those organizations are still in that emotional fear mode. So I always say, we have to stop and give ourselves a bit of time to catch up with what's happening in a natural response to fear and be able to, I mean, in the olden days, we used to say, count to 10. Well, in reality, it takes longer than 10 seconds for a lot of people to get over fear. And I use the acronym FACE, FACE, to face fear. And F stands for flexibility. And I just think, it's important for us to remember flexibility is our greatest superpower in times of fear. And of course, many of us don't like flexibility because it means we can't stand on something concrete. But if we prepare ourselves as project managers to be flexible, if we do it in sort of like a risk planning where we go, the risk is I'm not going to want to be flexible. So what do? I think about ways to help myself be flexible. And then we build in some stopgaps for that. A of FACE stands for agility. And I'm not talking about being an agile project manager. I'm talking about the verb of agile. When you're agile, it means it's a combination of flexibility and go with the flow. To be agile on the dance floor, for instance, means when the music changes, you don't stop or you don't continue to dance the way you danced to the last song. You adjust your dance moves and you go with the next beat. And that agility really means that when context is around you, when circumstances change, you have the ability to change your pace to go with it. Agility is really helpful in facing fear because fear isn't something we necessarily can control. You can't, say, I'm never going to be afraid again, because then you have to live in a bubble. And that isn't real. And as certainly as project managers, we know fear is everywhere because risk abounds. So with that, the C in FACE stands for creativity. And this really is that scratching at that when you're a project manager, when you're a project team, we have to be creative in times of complexity. When risk is being actually realized, this is the time to, yes, look at what we planned for. But at the same time, beyond what we planned for, what can we creatively do? What's going to make sense? So, for instance, you bring those interest holders into that meeting. They are freaking out with fear and emotion. What do? Don't push them. Create some space for them and allow them to feel that they can trust you. And then from that, what happens is their fear decreases and their creativity or their innovation can increase. And so can yours. So it's really important to do that flexible, agile, creative. And then the final part of FACE is E. And I think for me, the E stands for empathy. You have to be empathetic to yourself in times of fear because fear is completely normal. It's a normal, natural, felt emotion. It's human. We can't avoid it. And so really it's about give yourself a break. Be empathetic to the fact that, yeah, this is tough stuff. And fear is something that we have to find ways to consciously move with and through, not around or avoid. But we also have to have empathy for others because if you're like me, I like tough situations. In fact, I've often been known to say something which is, I like hard things. And I do. I like it when things get tough because for me, there's a sense of, I think, entrepreneurship that comes out in me because I love the idea that we're going to have to be creative and flexible. But you got to be empathetic that not everybody's on that same trajectory as you. So in projects, it's really important to customize your approach in times of complexity to your interest holders, to your team, to your subject matter experts, and to yourself. Because when you have empathy for all those different stages, it will allow for people to recognize that you're not going to railroad them, you're not going to force them to feel. You can't force people to feel something. You can say in your organization, this is what we believe. But when you say what we believe, you really just mean you, the mouthpiece, or you, the corporate C-suite, or you, the team that's decided. The culture of everyone gets to determine, where they're at. So that's my acronym for fear. And it's not about avoiding it. It's about being flexible, agile, creative, and empathetic in it. Is that helpful?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Um, the fear itself, overcoming the fear and getting into as you just said, I like hard things.
Yeah.
Not everyone likes hard things,
Yeah.
or hard conversations.
Yep.
And that's going to be a lot of hard conversations. One of the things I do want to make sure that we capture in this conversation on catastrophe is not just the hard things in the moment,
Mhm.
but there's sometimes a bit of an event that, like, once you get over the hill and you're
Mhm.
past the hump,
Mhm.
to not look back and catalog lessons learned
Mm.
and really go, okay,
Mm.
what happened? What can we do to make sure, because if we're going to look at risk analysis,
Yep.
that risk doesn't show back up again?
Yeah.
I know from some of my experiences, and I'm sure some of your experiences, you've seen something and go, oh,
There it is
there it is
again.
again. Whatever it was last time, we didn't catalog, put it in the right space, or
Mhm.
or even sometimes it's just distributed through corporate knowledge or
Yeah.
corporate organization. Like, this group learned it, but that group didn't. And
Mm.
oops, we didn't put it in one of our regional meetings
Yeah.
to make sure, because we don't want to talk about when it went bad.
I know.
Like, if something went beautiful
Yeah.
and it went up,
We wanna brag.
yeah. Oh my God, did you see that? Under budget, under
I
time.
know.
Can't wait to tell about that. But you're like 3 months over and
Yeah.
2 billion over.
Yeah.
But we learn.
I know. But you know what? You, Martin, sitting here, me, Amber, sitting here, we are only in these seats right now in this moment because of our failures. It's not because of our successes that we come to this table for this conversation. And I cannot stress that enough. I have sucked so much that I get to be here. And I think, that's really hard to say. There's a lot of people I know that can't ever say that. They don't even want to articulate it. In fact, they would argue, you don't put that out into the world. Don't say you've made mistakes or you've sucked, because they think that admitting or even having the awareness that they made mistakes, they think that makes them vulnerable and or bad or not good at their job. It is the exact opposite, my friend. It is the sum total of your failures that brings you to success. And it is the combination of success and failure. And I think in project management in our profession, what we hopefully are incredibly skilled at is that we recognize this. And when the projects fail, I always ask the question, well, what's the metric we're measuring? Because pretty much every project I've worked on has failed in some way, shape, or form, depending on what metric you're using. Because no project that I have ever planned and worked on has gone exactly the way we planned it, which, based on the metric of did what we planned happen, it was a failure. And that's because complexity abounds in projects. So it's really about, well, how are you measuring it? And a very frequent way to measure project success is to say, well, scope, time, and cost. That's the triple constraints. So based on those triple constraints, or as I like to call it, the three-legged stool, did all the legs maintain the same height the whole time? Well, of course not, because each one of those things gets bent or twisted or moved depending on risks realized, depending on the complexity. However, I don't think measuring project success based on triple constraints is enough. I think a better measurement is, how did everyone treat everyone? And how did we create this new thing in light of the triple constraints and yet still get it across the finish line with rapport, relationship, and trust? If you have trust in your key interest holders and your project team toward the end of your project, even if it costs more, took longer, and was slightly under or out of, or, scope was off, the relationship and the way you end it can be a better predictor of future success, both the success of that project, but also, are we ever going to work together again? I'll tell you what, I've worked with a lot of people. I will never work with them again. That's not because they're not redeemable or that they can't learn. It's because, based on our gifts and skills and the way we work together, it didn't go well. And I don't have a lot of hopes that it would. So although I don't want to be closed forever, I'm leery. I'm cautious because I didn't inspire trust in them and they didn't inspire trust in me. And so that trust factor becomes, to me, a greater measurement or metric. And I think when you're talking about world level kind of big projects that are transforming the way we live and work and breathe, for that matter, on the planet, it's actually, who are we going to trust? Who or what companies do we believe share our values? The generations that are emerging now, the ones younger than me, thank goodness, they have a conscience that I didn't have. Because my bias, my filter was far more about, I think, surviving. I'm trying to find a way to thrive as a female in business. My age, I'm more than middle age, and I recognize that I didn't have as many privileges because of my gender. Now, that's not, nor should it be, a reality in a North American market today. And the generations even that I've been a part of raising, they don't see it that way. And I'm slightly envious, but I'm also grateful because their bias is different. Their filters are different. And as a result, I think it's time. It's time for us to measure success differently. It's time for us to be the sum total of all of our parts, positive and negative.
Yeah, I absolutely love the way you're talking about measuring it differently, and just to capture, because there's a lot there. You've got that three-legged stool. It could have, on time, in budget, in scope,
Yeah.
and still be ugly. In other words,
Definitely.
It could still suck.
Oh my gosh.
So
and it could have no trust. Yeah.
Would still be there.
Yeah.
But it sucked. And I love where you come back to trust with that.
Yeah.
And as you know, when I was studying to do my training for special military teams,
mm-hmm.
I went in with a motto that was my motto, which is, I love the way this sucks. which literally said to what you're talking about around trust and mindset.
Right.
Suck's coming.
Yeah.
How am I going to reframe suck?
Yeah.
So that every suck pushes me towards success.
Yeah.
Because they're going to happen. Like in every project, in every instance, suck's coming your way. It's going to come. Mm-hmm. If you think it's not Pollyanna, I don't like Pollyanna. I'm not
not the movie. The movie was very good. Let's be clear about it.
Nice. I'm an optimist, but I don't want to. I want to prepare for things that are not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But as we get ready to kind of like sum it all up, I think what you're talking about in that measurement is that space around trust.
Yeah.
When you see the suck, because we can see the suck coming, and if we have high trust, we're going to be able to address it.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, what would you do with an interest holder when you can see the suck coming?
Yeah.
And you really want to be like, it's time to measure something different than what you're measuring.
Yeah.
So we can address that before the suck happens.
Yeah. So I think, one thing that's really important to remember in project management, and certainly if you're functioning on a project team and you're in the suck, I love that you said that. I use terms like complexity and risk, and you just hammer it into like suck. So when you're in the suck in your project, what I think is really important to help reframe to your interest holders is the notion that they are not on a different side than the project team. And oftentimes I feel like we get this us and theming. It's actually all of us on the project, interest holders included, and the suck on the other side. It's the suck that's the them. The us is we are all watching and looking and observing the suck. And I think that is where, when you have mutual respect and trust with your interest holders that you've cultivated by listening, being empathetic, and creating space for them to really see that you value them, when the suck comes, everyone on the side of the project can go, oh my gosh, that sucks. And here are some concrete ways that we can innovate and be creative to solve it. And I see that happen time and time again. When your interest holder trusts you and feels aligned on the same side as you, then it's all of us against the suck, as opposed to the suck and them and us. And I think that's, like, I love that you've said that. Like, it's inevitable. It's how we are going to face that suck. And, this is also where I think having the mindset that whatever comes, we will have opportunity to learn, to grow, and to change. Projects have to navigate change due to the nature of the uniqueness of what we're doing. A project exists only because it's creating something new that we've never had it before in this way. So that level of uncertainty means, like how do we navigate that together and learn from it? A lot of very successful, and I'm using air quotes here that you can't see, successful projects actually sucked for the people on them. Relationships were ruined. Whole organizations lacked trust in others, and work in future projects never happened because that project did such a poor job of respecting the interest holders in it. I think that's a bigger issue than finding a way to measure success in, yeah, we didn't do what we said we were going to do, but we did some cool stuff. And let's write all that cool stuff down. And then let's build enough trust and rapport with the next project team that they will trust us that these lessons are for them too. That handoff, that idea of handing the project over or handing the next phase over to the next team and them trusting that here's what we learned. And then they pick up from there. I mean, the exponential growth of wisdom and knowledge, huge, but only if we respect and trust each other. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of papers or it's just a bunch of files that nobody wants to read. And that isn't lessons learned. That isn't project success. That's, oh God, it's over. Let's just move on. And I don't think that helps any of us. So if you really want to change the trajectory of your career, be one of those professionals that people are like, man, when I work with them, I feel aligned, I feel respected, I feel heard, and I trust them. Man, you want to change your career, be that person. And you will have no end of opportunity because it's about your mindset and the idea that you will measure your success by your experience and your willingness to grow and change.
And I want to thank you for this conversation because here's what I trust. I trust there's a lot of value in this conversation. And I trust that based on these conversations that we are having right here, that our listeners can trust the next one's going to be just as valuable for them as well.
And if they're not, they can tell us. And
that's right.
We will learn and grow.
And we will hear the feedback on the suck.
That's right. Feedback on the suck.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Martin. Bye.
Bye.